"Mom, eat the leftovers," my son said casually, shutting the door. I thought it was a gesture of care until I opened the Tupperware. What I found inside wasn't just old food. It was a cold, hard message telling me exactly where I stood in this house, somewhere between a burden and a trash can. My name is Evelyn, and at 68 years old, I never imagined my golden years would be spent tiptoeing around a house that I helped pay for. After my husband, Robert, passed away 3 years ago, the silence in our old Victorian home became too loud to bear. My son, Mark, suggested I sell it. "Come live with us, Mom," he had insisted, his eyes full of promise. "We'll take care of you." So, I did. I handed over the proceeds from the sale to help Mark and his wife, Sarah, upgrade to a spacious suburban home in Connecticut, believing I was investing in our shared future. I am a retired librarian, a woman who values order, quiet dignity, and the warmth of family. I didn't come here to be a burden. I came to be a grandmother to my future grandkids and a support system for my busy children. Mark is a hardworking architect, always chasing the next deadline, while Sarah works in high-pressure PR. I took it upon myself to manage the household chores, cooking, cleaning, and laundry, not because they asked, but because I wanted to show my gratitude. I thought we were a team. I thought I was a cherished matriarch, not an unpaid housekeeper living in the guest room. But as the months turned into a year, the lines between gratitude and expectation began to blur dangerously. My hands aren't what they used to be. Looking at them now, resting on the cold granite countertop, I see the map of my life, veins protruding like blue rivers under paper-thin skin, knuckles slightly swollen from arthritis. These hands used to catalog thousands of books, soothing the spines of novels and organizing chaos into order. Now, they mostly tremble when I hold a coffee cup, a physical betrayal that frustrates me to tears. Deep down, I harbor a terrifying, hollow ache that started the day Robert took his last breath. He was my anchor. Without him, I feel like a boat unmoored in a storm, constantly drifting, waiting to crash against the rocks. Selling our home wasn't just a financial decision, it was a severance of my history. I traded my independence for companionship, but the transaction left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. I possess a deep-seated fear of becoming obsolete, of being the old furniture that no one knows what to do with but is too polite to throw away. This fear makes me hyper-vigilant. My eyes, once bright and observant, are now constantly darting around the room, scanning Mark and Sarah's faces for the slightest hint of annoyance. When Sarah sighs after a long day, my stomach creates knots, wondering if I am the cause of her exhaustion. I catch myself holding my breath when they talk in low voices in the other room, my body tense, leaning forward, terrified they are discussing an exit strategy for me. I overcompensate with service. I scrub the floors until my knees ache and my back seizes up, hoping that if I am useful enough, they won't abandon me. It's a pathetic, desperate need for validation. I smile until my cheeks hurt, masking the loneliness that gnaws at my bones. When I look in the mirror, I don't just see an aging woman. I see someone fading away, transparent, begging to be seen as a person, not just a responsibility. This emotional fragility makes every comment feel like a judgment, every oversight feel like a deliberate slight. I am walking on eggshells of my own making, terrified that one wrong step will shatter the fragile peace I've desperately tried to build. Before the shadow of the refrigerator fell over our household, life had a rhythm that felt almost melodic. I remember the mornings with a distinct fondness, the way the Connecticut sun would spill across the breakfast nook, warming the oak table where we all gathered. I would wake up at 5:30 a.m., not out of obligation, but out of joy, to brew a fresh pot of coffee and bake blueberry muffins, the scent wafting upstairs to wake the kids. Sarah would rush down, adjusting her blazer, her face lighting up when she saw the spread. "Oh, Evelyn, you're a lifesaver," she would chirp, grabbing a muffin with a genuine smile. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Those words were my fuel. They made the hours of cleaning and laundry feel light, almost effortless. We had a system, or so I believed. I managed the domestic sphere, ensuring that when Mark and Sarah returned from their corporate battles, they entered a sanctuary of peace and hot meals. Evenings were my favorite. We would sit around the dinner table, passing bowls of pot roast or lasagna. Mark would tell funny stories about his clients, and Sarah would actually ask for my advice on office politics, listening intently, as if my years of experience held weight. There was laughter, real, belly-shaking laughter that bounced off the walls and filled the empty spaces in my heart. I felt essential. I felt loved. I took pride in my thriftiness, often turning Sunday's roast chicken into Monday's soup. Mom's magic, Mark called it. It was a gentle, harmonious existence where boundaries seemed unnecessary because love was the governing law. I truly believed that my sacrifices were being honored, that the leftovers I often ate for lunch were just my way of contributing to the household economy, not a foreshadowing of my status. The air in the house felt light, buoyant with gratitude, and I went to sleep every night thanking God for this second chance at family life. The shift didn't happen with a bang. It happened with the squeak of a styrofoam container. It started casually enough. Mark and Sarah would come home late, exhausted, carrying brown paper bags that smelled of roasted garlic, expensive truffle oil, or spicy Thai basil. We grabbed a bite on the way, Mark would say, loosening his tie, barely looking at me as he headed for the wine rack. There's still plenty of that meatloaf from Tuesday, Mom. You don't mind, right? At first, I didn't mind. I convinced myself it was practical. I hated waste, after all. But then, the pattern solidified into a rigid, humiliating rule. I watched from the kitchen island, my hands clasping and unclasping a dish towel until my knuckles turned white as they unpacked sushi platters, vibrant rolls of tuna and avocado glistening under the pendant lights. My stomach rumbled, a traitorous sound in the quiet room. Sarah would catch my eye, not with an apology, but with a breezy, detached indifference. "Oh, Evelyn, the sushi might be too raw for your stomach anyway. The pasta in the fridge really needs to be eaten before it turns." It was the phrase "needs to be eaten" that began to slice through me like a serrated knife. I wasn't being fed, I was being utilized as a biological waste disposal unit. I remember sitting opposite them one Tuesday evening. They were sharing a bottle of Pinot Noir and laughing about a colleague's wardrobe malfunction. I sat there with a bowl of reheated, gray-looking soup that had formed a gelatinous skin on top. I took a spoonful, the lukewarm liquid tasting of salt and metal, and forced it down my throat. My throat constricted, muscles tightening in a spasm, fighting the urge to gag not just from the taste, but from the sheer indignity of it. I looked at Mark, my son, the boy I had breastfed, the boy I had made fresh organic purees for. He didn't even glance at my bowl. He was too busy pouring more wine for Sarah. The misunderstanding, if I can be generous enough to call it that, was that they viewed me as content with scraps. They assumed that because I was old, my palate had died, along with my self-respect. They thought they were being resourceful, but every bite I took felt like I was swallowing my pride. I felt small, shrinking into the chair, my posture hunched as if trying to take up less space. Then came the morning that truly defined the conflict. Mark was rushing out the door for a business trip. "Mom," he called out, checking his watch, his voice devoid of affection, "don't forget to finish the leftovers in the fridge. I need the Tupperware empty for the weekend." He didn't say have lunch. He said finish the leftovers, like it was a chore on a checklist. When I opened the fridge later, the cold air hitting my flushed face, I found the container he meant. It wasn't a meal. It was a chaotic, insulting heap of 3 different nights' refuse. A hardened crust of pizza, a few limp, oil-soaked asparagus spears, and half a pork chop that looked dry as a bone. My reflection in the stainless steel fridge door looked back at me, withered, gray, and pathetic. My hands trembled violently as I reached for the plastic container. I felt a hot sting behind my eyes, my vision blurring with unshed tears. It wasn't just food, it was a message. You get what we don't want. I stood there, shivering in the kitchen. I kept spotless for them, holding a box of trash, realizing that to my own son, I had become nothing more than another appliance to be managed. It was a Friday evening, usually a time of relief, but the air in the kitchen felt heavy with my own quiet rebellion. I had decided to reclaim a fragment of my dignity. I used a small portion of my dwindling pension money to buy a single, beautiful ribeye steak, not for the family, but for myself. I seasoned it with fresh rosemary and garlic, the aroma filling the kitchen, a scent of nostalgia and self-worth. I sat at the small kitchen island, a linen napkin on my lap, ready to take my first bite of fresh, hot food in what felt like a lifetime. Just then, the front door burst open. Mark and Sarah walked in, but they weren't alone. Sarah's boss, a boisterous man named Mr. Henderson, was with them. Panic flared in my chest. I wasn't dressed for company. Sarah's eyes zeroed in on my steak, steaming perfectly on the plate. Her face didn't register. "Mom is eating dinner." It registered opportunity. "Oh, perfect timing," Sarah exclaimed, her voice shrill and performative. She swooped in, grabbing the plate right from under my nose before I could even lift my fork. "Evelyn has prepared a lovely tasting portion, Mr. Henderson. You must try this. The seasoning is her secret recipe." I sat frozen, my hand still raised, holding a fork over empty space. My mouth fell open, a silent gasp trapped in my throat. I looked at Mark, pleading with my eyes, my brows furrowed in confusion and hurt, begging him to intervene, to say, "No, that's Mom's dinner." But Mark just nervously loosened his tie and ushered Mr. Henderson to the dining room. "Thanks, Mom," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze entirely. Sarah turned back to me, the professional smile dropping from her face like a heavy curtain falling. She opened the fridge and pulled out that same wretched container from the morning, the pizza crusts, the dry pork. She thrust it into my trembling hands. "Here," she whispered, her voice tight. "We need the island for drinks. You can eat this in your room. You prefer the soft stuff anyway, right? It's easier on your teeth." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud crack. It was the sound of a heavy chain breaking under immense pressure. I looked down at the cold, congealed mess in the plastic box, then up at Sarah's perfectly made-up face. My hands started to shake, not from age this time, but from a blinding, white-hot rage that started in my belly and flooded my veins. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The heat rose up my neck, flushing my pale cheeks a deep, blotchy crimson. My eyes, usually soft and watery, dried up instantly and hardened into steel. I looked at my hands, the hands that had nursed Mark, the hands that had signed over my life savings to them. They were holding garbage, and in that moment, the self-sacrificing mother in me died, and the woman I used to be woke up. I didn't say a word. I felt the tears prickling, but I forced them back, swallowing the lump of sorrow until it tasted like bile. I tightened my grip on the Tupperware until the plastic creaked audibly. They didn't see a mother, they saw a servant. And servants can quit. I stood up, my spine uncurling from its usual hunch. I looked at Sarah with a gaze so intense she actually took a step back. I wasn't just sad anymore, I was dangerous. The next morning, the kitchen was silent as a tomb. For the first time in a year, the house didn't smell of brewing Arabica coffee or sizzling bacon. It smelled only of the sterile, cold air of the suburbs. I woke up at 6 a.m., but instead of reaching for my apron, I reached for my best silk blouse and the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary. I applied a coat of red lipstick, a shade I hadn't worn since the funeral, and sat at the kitchen island with a cup of tea I had made only for myself. When Sarah rushed down at 7:15 a.m., phone glued to her ear, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her hair was a mess, and she looked around wildly, like a rat in a maze that had suddenly changed. "Evelyn, where's the coffee? The pot is empty." I didn't look up from my iPad. "There are leftovers in the filter from yesterday," I said calmly, my voice smooth and cool like polished glass. "Just add hot water. You hate waste, remember?" Sarah's jaw dropped, her face flushing pink. Before she could sputter a retort, Mark came stumbling in, buttoning his shirt wrong. "Mom, my gray suit isn't pressed. Did you forget?" "No," I replied, finally looking at him. My eyes were dry and clear. "I didn't forget. I retired. The iron is in the laundry room." Leaving them standing there in a chaotic stupor, I grabbed my purse and walked out the front door. I didn't go to the grocery store. I took an Uber to the law offices of Sterling and Finch. Arthur Sterling had been Robert's attorney for decades. When I sat in his leather chair, explaining the situation, I wasn't the weeping widow, I was a creditor calling in a debt. I showed him the bank transfer records, the massive sum I had given Mark for the down payment. Arthur's eyes narrowed behind his spectacles. "Evelyn, without a gift letter, this can be legally construed as a loan or a conditional investment in a living arrangement. If the conditions your care aren't met, we have leverage. Draft the papers," I said, my heart pounding not with fear, but with the thrill of taking control. "And Arthur, I need you to draft an invoice, too." I spent the rest of the day at a spa, charging the bill to the emergency credit card Mark thought I had forgotten about, the one linked to the joint account I technically still co-owned. I turned off my phone. I didn't care about their texts. I didn't care about the panicked voicemails asking who would pick up the dry cleaning. When I returned home that evening, the house was dark and tense. Mark and Sarah were sitting at the dining table, looking exhausted and furious. They had ordered pizza. "Where have you been?" Mark demanded, standing up. "Do you have any idea?" "Sit down," I commanded. The authority in my voice was so foreign, so absolute, that he actually sat. I made dinner. I walked to the fridge and pulled out 3 Tupperware containers. I walked around the table, placing one in front of Mark, one in front of Sarah, and one in front of myself. "What is this?" Sarah asked, wrinkling her nose. "Open it," I said, smiling a smile that didn't reach my eyes. They popped the lids. Inside was the collection of the week's trash. The half-eaten crusts, the gray pork chop, the limp vegetables. The smell of stale food filled the room. "Mom, this is disgusting," Mark gagged. "It's what you've been feeding me for 6 months," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I thought since it was good enough for the woman who paid for this house, it was good enough for you." Then, I pulled the document Arthur had prepared from my bag. I slammed it onto the table next to the rotting pork chop. It wasn't a lawsuit yet. It was an invoice. Invoice for domestic services. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, emotional labor, period 12 months. Total due, $48,000. You have until the first of the month to set up a payment plan, I said, watching their faces turn from confusion to absolute, white-faced horror. Or we can discuss the repayment of the down payment with Mr. Sterling. Enjoy your leftovers. The silence hung for a second before shattering. Sarah didn't cry. She laughed, a cold, brittle sound that sent shivers down my spine. She picked up the invoice, crumpled it into a tight ball, and threw it at my face. It bounced harmlessly off my chest, but the gesture hit me like a stone. You think you can blackmail us in our own house? She hissed, her face contorted, the veins in her neck bulging like blue cords. After everything we've done for you? Mark, however, did something far worse than yelling. He didn't raise his voice. He sighed, a long, weary sound, and looked at me with pity, manufactured, weaponized pity. He walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip uncomfortably tight, trapping me in the chair. Mom, he said softly, we were afraid it would come to this. We've noticed you, slipping lately. My blood ran cold, freezing in my veins. Slipping? I whispered, my voice trembling. The aggression, the confusion, the paranoia about the food, Mark continued, his voice steady, reciting a script I realized they must have rehearsed. Sarah found some brochures. Assisted living facilities. Places that deal with dementia. Sarah smirked, crossing her arms, her eyes gleaming with malice. If you try to sue us, Evelyn, or make a scene, we'll counter-sue for guardianship. We'll tell the court you're mentally unstable. We have witnesses, Mr. Henderson saw how erratic you were with that stake. Who do you think a judge will believe? The successful architect and his PR executive wife, or the confusing old woman who thinks her family is starving her? My heart stopped. The room spun violently. They weren't just greedy, they were predatory. Mark leaned in closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and betrayal. Tear up the invoice, Mom. Go back to being helpful. Or we'll put you in a state home where the leftovers are all you'll ever get. And trust me, you won't have a view. I looked into my son's eyes and saw a stranger. He was threatening to lock me away to protect his bank account. My hands gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white, my body shaking not with fear, but with the terrifying clarity of the monster I had raised. Mark's threat hung in the air, a poisonous cloud meant to choke the life out of me. He looked at me with a triumphant sneer, convinced that the fear of being labeled demented would force me back into submission. He expected tears. He expected begging. He expected his mother to shrink away. Instead, I started to chuckle. It started low in my throat and bubbled up until I was laughing openly, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. You really are your father's son, Mark, I said, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. He always tried to bluff when he held a losing hand, too. Mark's face faltered. What are you talking about? You think I didn't know? I asked, my voice hardening into steel. You think I've spent the last 40 years managing libraries, complex systems of information, only to let 2 children outsmart me? I knew you'd play the senile card. It's the coward's favorite weapon. I reached into my purse, which I had kept on my lap, and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud that silenced the room. Open it, I commanded. Sarah reached for it, her fingers trembling. She tore it open and pulled out a document stamped with the official seal of the state's leading neurologist. Date. Yesterday, Sarah read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. Patient, Evelyn, cognitive assessment, score 30/30, perfectly lucid, no signs of decline. I went to Dr. Evans before I went to the spa, I explained, leaning forward, enjoying the way the color drained from Mark's face. I have a clean bill of mental health, certified and notarized. Your claims of dementia won't hold up in court. In fact, making false claims to gain guardianship, that's fraud. And attempting to coerce me by threatening institutionalization, that borders on elder abuse. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent. That will be Arthur, I said calmly. I told him to come by if I didn't text him a safe word by 8 p.m. Since you were busy threatening to lock me away, I forgot to text. Mark scrambled to the door, but Arthur Sterling was already letting himself in with the spare key I had given him that morning. Arthur, a man who looked like a bulldog in a 3-piece suit, strode into the dining room, holding a briefcase that looked heavier than Mark's conscience. Good evening, Arthur boomed, ignoring Mark's outstretched hand. He looked at the half-eaten pizza and the tuition invoice on the table. I see we've reached the negotiation phase. Arthur placed a new document on the table. Since Evelyn is fully competent, we are rescinding the gift status of the down payment. As there was no signed gift letter provided to the bank, a clerical oversight you two conveniently ignored at the time, the $200,000 is legally a revocable loan. And since you have breached the verbal contract of providing a safe and nurturing home, Evelyn is calling in the loan. Sarah gasped, clutching her chest. We can't pay that back. We'd have to sell the house. Exactly, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. I looked at the fridge, then back at them. You wanted to treat me like a tenant? Fine. Tenants have rights. Landlords have obligations. And creditors? Creditors get paid. You have 30 days to return my money, or Arthur files a lien on this property. And believe me, he loves leftovers. He'll eat you alive in court. The month that followed was a blur of legalities, cardboard boxes, and the cold, hard reality of consequences. They tried to fight it, of course. Mark sent long, rambling emails about family duty, and Sarah tried to guilt-trip me with hypothetical grandchildren that suddenly became their bargaining chips. But Arthur stood like a stone wall between their manipulation and my peace of mind. They had no choice. They didn't have the liquidity to pay me back without liquidating the asset. The for sale sign that went up on the pristine suburban lawn wasn't just a real estate listing. It was my declaration of independence. I remember the day I walked out of that house for the last time. It was raining, a gray, washing rain that felt appropriate for a cleansing. Mark stood in the foyer, surrounded by half-packed boxes, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified look of a man who realized he had killed the goose that laid the golden eggs. "Mom," he croaked, reaching out a hand, his voice cracking. "Where will you go? We can still fix this." I adjusted my silk scarf, looking at him not with anger, but with a distant, calm pity. I saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of losing me, but fear of facing the world without his safety net. "I am going somewhere I am invited, Mark," I said softly. "Not somewhere I am stored." I didn't look back. As the Uber pulled away, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders, a pressure I hadn't realized I was carrying until it was gone. The check from the sale of the house cleared 2 weeks later. It was enough. Enough to secure my future and buy a sunny, 2-bedroom condo in an active senior community that had a garden, a library, and a strictly enforced no-mooching children vibe. My new kitchen is small, but it is exclusively mine. The fridge is stainless steel and spotless, and inside, there are no styrofoam containers of other people's garbage. There are fresh strawberries, a bottle of chilled Chardonnay, a block of expensive Gouda, and ingredients for meals I want to eat. Last night, I hosted a dinner party, not for family, but for my book club, a group of women I had neglected while playing the role of the dutiful servant. I made a roast chicken with lemon and herbs, roasted root vegetables, and a dark chocolate tart. We laughed until our sides ached. No one checked their watch, no one asked me to iron a shirt, no one told me to eat the scraps. As I washed the dishes later, my choice, not a chore, I looked out the window at the city lights. I heard through the grapevine that Mark and Sarah had to downsize significantly. They are renting a cramped apartment across town. Sarah has to cook now. I imagine she's learning that leftovers aren't magical manifestations, but the result of hard work she never appreciated. I won. I got my money back, yes. But more importantly, I reclaimed my narrative. I am no longer the extra character in their story, waiting in the wings to clean up their mess. I am the protagonist of my own life again. The silence in my apartment isn't lonely. It is rich with possibility. I sat down on my velvet sofa, put my feet up, and took a bite of a fresh, warm croissant. It tasted like victory. It tasted like respect. And for the first time in years, I was finally full. The month that followed was a blur of legalities and cardboard boxes. They tried to fight it, of course. Mark sent long, rambling emails about family duty, and Sarah tried to guilt-trip me with hypothetical grandchildren. But Arthur stood like a stone wall between their manipulation and my peace of mind. They had no choice. They didn't have the liquidity to pay me back without liquidating the asset. The for sale sign that went up on the lawn wasn't just a real estate listing, it was my declaration of independence. I remember the day I walked out of that house for the last time. It was raining, a gray, washing rain. Mark stood in the foyer, surrounded by half-packed boxes, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified look of a man who realized he had killed the goose that laid the golden eggs. "Mom," he croaked, reaching out a hand, "where will you go? We can still fix this." I adjusted my silk scarf, looking at him not with anger, but with a distant, calm pity. "I am going somewhere. I am invited, Mark," I said softly, "not somewhere I am stored." I didn't look back. As the Uber pulled away, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders, a pressure I hadn't realized I was carrying until it was gone. The check from the sale of the house cleared 2 weeks later. It was enough. Enough to buy a sunny, two-bedroom condo in a community that had a garden, a library, and a strictly enforced no mooching children vibe. My new kitchen is small, but it is exclusively mine. The fridge is stainless steel and spotless. And inside, there are no styrofoam containers of other people's garbage. There are fresh strawberries, a bottle of chilled Chardonnay, and ingredients for meals I want to eat. Last night, I hosted a dinner party. Not for family, but for my book club, a group of women I had neglected while playing the role of the dutiful servant. I made a roast chicken with herbs and a dark chocolate tart. We laughed until our sides ached. No one checked their watch. No one asked me to iron a shirt. No one told me to eat the scraps. As I washed the dishes later, my choice, not a chore, I looked out the window at the city lights. I heard through the grapevine that Mark and Sarah had to downsize significantly. They are renting a cramped apartment across town. Sarah has to cook now. I imagine she's learning that leftovers aren't magical manifestations, but the result of hard work she never appreciated. I won. I got my money back, yes. But more importantly, I reclaimed my narrative. I am no longer the extra character in their story, waiting in the wings to clean up their mess. I am the protagonist of my own life again. The silence in my apartment isn't lonely, it is rich with possibility. I sat down on my velvet sofa, put my feet up, and took a bite of a fresh, warm croissant. It tasted like victory. It tasted like respect. And for the first time in years, I was finally full. Even though the deed is done and the papers are signed, the silence in my new apartment sometimes feels heavy, not with peace, but with the ghost of what I lost. I sit in my favorite armchair by the window, holding a framed photograph of Mark from his college graduation. In the picture, his arm is draped around my shoulder, his smile wide and genuine. I trace the glass over his face with a trembling finger, feeling a sharp, physical ache in the center of my chest that no amount of money or justice can soothe. I battle the guilt that whispers in the dark, "You chose money over your son." It is a corrosive thought. A mother is supposed to be an endless well of forgiveness, isn't she? I wonder if I was too harsh. Maybe if I had spoken up sooner, instead of silently resenting the leftovers, things wouldn't have escalated to courtrooms and evictions. I close my eyes, letting my head rest back against the cushion, and I can almost feel the phantom weight of the family I wanted so desperately to preserve. I question my own motives. Did I serve them out of love? Or was I trying to buy their affection with labor? Was I an enabler who crippled my own son's ability to be a decent man by never saying no? My stomach churns with a mix of righteousness and sorrow. I look at my hands, the hands that signed the lawsuit. They feel stronger, yes, but also colder. I have to remind myself that the pain I feel is the pain of a bone breaking so it can be reset correctly. I didn't abandon Mark. I stopped participating in his moral decay. Yet, the victory tastes bittersweet. I have my self-respect. I have my financial security, but I have a hole in my life where my son used to be. I wrestle with the realization that sometimes loving yourself means breaking the heart of the person you raised. It is a terrible, necessary paradox that leaves me staring at the sunset with dry eyes and a heavy, conflicted heart, knowing I did the right thing, but wishing with every fiber of my being that I hadn't needed to. Through this ordeal, I have learned that unconditional love is often weaponized by children to mean unconditional submission from their parents. For decades, I equated being a good mother with being a doormat, believing that the more I erased myself, the more I shone for them. I was wrong. I thought that by making myself small, I was making room for my children to grow, but I only made room for their selfishness to expand like a weed choking a garden. Real love requires respect, and respect requires ironclad boundaries. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you certainly cannot nourish a family when you are being fed scraps. I discovered that my worth is inherent, not conditional on how many shirts I iron or how much money I provide. I learned that silence is not peace, it is permission. By speaking up, I didn't just save myself. I gave Mark the hardest, most necessary lesson of his adult life, that people, even mothers, have breaking points. I am not a resource to be mined. I am a person to be cherished, and if the gardener is negligent, the gate must be locked. Despite the scorching pain of betrayal, I have decided not to cut Mark off forever. That would be the easy way out, hardening my heart into stone. Instead, I am choosing a path of distant grace. I sent him a card for his birthday last week. Just a card, no check, no guilt-ridden letter. My hand hovered over the pen, trembling slightly, not from age, but from the fear of rejection. Yet I wrote a simple, "I hope you are well." It is an olive branch, but it is not a ladder for him to climb back onto my back. I am willing to rebuild, but the foundation must be different this time. We will meet in public spaces, cafes, or parks, where the dynamic is neutral and the bill is split. I will not step foot in their new rental, nor will I invite them to my sanctuary, not for a long time. The door is cracked open, but the safety chain is still firmly on. If he wants a mother, I am here. If he wants a servant, that position has been permanently abolished. Looking back with the clarity of distance, I must admit my own culpability in this tragedy. My critical error was in assuming that shared DNA guaranteed shared values. I was naive to hand over my life savings without a legal contract, driven by a romanticized notion of family rather than pragmatic wisdom. I let my fear of loneliness cloud my judgment, trading my financial leverage for the illusion of belonging. I see now that I enabled their behavior from the very start. By eagerly accepting the leftovers in the beginning to be low maintenance, I trained them to treat me as secondary. I failed to set the standard for how I wished to be treated, assuming they would naturally divine it through gratitude. They didn't. My passivity was the fertile soil in which their entitlement grew. I should have spoken up the very first time Mark handed me a cold plate, rather than swallowing it in silence. Acknowledging this doesn't excuse them, but it frees me. I now know that we teach people how to treat us, and I have finally finished that lesson. To everyone listening, especially those of you who are parents navigating the tricky waters of adult children, take this story to heart. In our culture, we often praise the self-sacrificing mother, the one who gives until she runs dry. We are taught that silence is a virtue and that helping out means disappearing into the background. But there is a dangerous line between being supportive and being exploited. I crossed that line because I was afraid of being alone, afraid of being useless. But I learned the hard way that being used is far lonelier than being alone. If you are a parent, keep your nest egg. Keep your name on the deed. Financial independence is the only thing that guarantees your voice will be heard when kindness fails. Do not attempt to buy love with your security. If it is real love, it does not come with a price tag attached. And to the adult children, look at your parents. Really look at them. We are not just relics of your past or free labor for your future. We are human beings with dignity, preferences, and a need for respect that doesn't expire when we retire. Communication is the bridge we burned. If I had said, "I deserve a fresh meal," on day one, we might not be here. If Mark had said, "Mom, we need space," instead of treating me like a ghost, we could have found a healthy solution. We let resentment rot in the fridge like old food until it poisoned us all. Don't let that happen to you. Speak up. Set boundaries early while the love is still fresh. And remember, you teach people how to value you. If you accept the leftovers without complaint, you will never be served the main course. You are worthy of the fresh steak, the warm seat at the table, and the gratitude that looks you in the eye. Never settle for scraps in the name of keeping the peace, because a peace built on your humiliation is not a peace worth keeping. Thank you for listening to my journey from the cold shadows of the kitchen to the warm sunlight of my own life. It wasn't easy to admit I was vulnerable, but if my story gave you the courage to check your own fridge and your relationships, then it was worth every word. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever felt taken for granted by your own family, or pressured to give too much? How did you handle it? Please hit that like button if you support my decision, and subscribe to the channel for more real stories about finding strength in the hardest moments. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who might need a reminder of their own worth. Until next time, remember, keep your head high, your boundaries strong, and your dinner fresh.